and we didn't even have a computer program that you could compute an orbital trajectory. That was the first job that I had, was to develop a computer program to compute an orbital trajectory. And
well, you needed to know where the space capsule was going to come back into the atmosphere and where it was going to land so you could rescue them.
yeah, and most all of the, for Project Mercury, all of the landing sites, all of them I calculated.
That's
Wow.
wild.
I wish I'd been recording all
And he was updating something on CO3 and says, I'm going to send you a copy of it. And I says, okay. But we had a person, his name was John Shoesmith. He was from somewhere in England. And he went to work for an aircraft company in Canada. Well, that aircraft company went out of business, so NASA hired all of those people. And he was one of the best computer programmers that I know of, and he wrote the program. And I worked with him on it, but he was responsible for writing that program. And that program turned out to be one of the workhorses of NASA. We done all of the Mercury flights with that program, all of the Gemini flights, and into Apollo with that program that we developed at Project Mercury. I was a part of it, but I wasn't the main part of it because the programmer knew more than I did. And at one time I had about 30 or 40 TRW engineers working with me, and all of them had PhD degrees, and all of them were smarter than I was, but I had more common sense than they did. and we got the job done.
So you were there when you were calculating everything by hand, and then when IBM came on the scene, what happened? I mean, when did computers actually move into the programming?
Well, we started out with the IBM 704 computer, and we developed all of the computer programming before the control center even had a computer program. In the early flights, the control center didn't have a computer program. We had to do all of it online, and then call into the control center and tell them when to fire the retros and where they were going to land and all of that.
Wow.
Use a calculator to help him publish a book. But
Yeah. That's the sign of the times that we're in.
But we done all of the work upbringing and way I was raised. You know, I've been around the world. I've been in the combat zone. I've been in Korea. I have worked in the space program. In fact, I was in the control center for every lunar mission this country's had. I was in the control center.
That's impressive.
That's awesome.
And so forth. To accomplish all of that, like Samuel keeps saying, says you've done a lot of things, says more than most people.
Good gosh.
So
You're in the 1/10 of 1% of accomplished people in this world.
I never thought as a kid coming up out here, play it with nothing, so to speak, to do what I've done. I never thought it was possible.
Didn't have indoor plumbing until you were a teenager.
No, in fact, I was almost through high school before we had electricity here. We didn't even have any power. I went through school studying by candles and stuff like and lamps, like those lamps up there.
Dad was telling me about that this weekend. He said when he was born out in the store, and you lived out there. Where were you born?
I was born in the old house
Down the road. Down the road.
down the road here, and then we moved up here. I think I was born in 1929, and I believe Daddy built that old store right there in back to 1929. So we moved from that old house into the back of that store, and I lived in the back of that store a good part of my life. In 1941, Daddy built this house here in 1941. So I think we probably moved in 42 or something like that, 41 or 42. But up until then, I lived in the back of that store.
This was chink and log, right?
Yeah.
How much of it was the original house? I know the kitchen was added on. Was this bathroom added on?
No, that was a back porch, and they just enclosed that bathroom from the back porch. Other than that living room right there in the kitchen, all of this is logged. It's original. Leave home again, and so when Mama wanted to sell it, I said, well, I'm gonna buy the home place. I said, that's home to me, and I want to live. And Louise loved it up here. It's private. It's quiet. Nobody bothers you. I live with the animals. Deer's in my yard every day. Turkey's in my yard every day. I put a game camera down there on the creek. I got a picture of bear. I got a picture of coyotes. A picture of bobcats. Everything down there. In fact, the other day I was out walking in the road here, and just before you get to that curve down there, I was looking down the road, and a big old bear across the road.
Oh my gosh.
With all these houses coming up everywhere too, there's still that much wildlife up here.
Yeah.
Wow. No, I totally get why you'd want to stay here.
So I keep telling people that it's home to me, and I wouldn't be happy anywhere else. I have lived in my lifetime. I've lived in Lynchburg. I lived in Hampton. I lived in Houston, Texas. I lived in Friendswood, Texas. I lived in Danville. And I lived up here. And I wouldn't trade the country up here for any of those places that I've lived. In small towns, big towns, and otherwise. I wouldn't trade the country for any of it.
It's where you belong.
That's the way I was brought up. And a whole lot of people don't see that and wouldn't put up with that, but
No, I get it.
it's home to me.
Absolutely.
And I don't intend to leave here until I absolutely have to.
They're gonna have to carry you out.
Yeah.
I don't blame you. Do it on your own terms, man. Just as long as you have a way to let people know that you're all right. That's what's important, because you don't want to worry your boys, you know.
Well, Charlie calls me once, twice a day. Holland calls me. He's already called me this morning. Holland calls me at least twice a day, in the morning and in the evening. And when I walk out, I carry my cell phone with me and
Good.
everything. If I need help, I can always call them.
Then you have it
That's it.
covered.
Yeah.
You have a plan. That's what matters. Once they know what your routine is, I mean, I don't care if you were 50 years old. I just want to know that you're safe.
Yeah. And well, I stay in contact with them, and as I say, it's home to me, and I just wouldn't feel initially a year or so ago, the boys, both of them, says you need to go to an assisted living place. I said, look, I don't want to go to an assisted living. I said that's just the next step to a nursing home, and there's no way I want to go to any in a nursing home.
Mm-hmm.
So stay on top of your health.
I'd rather go to the cemetery
Mm-hmm.
than a nursing home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
I
my
know.
feeling. A lot of people are different, but that's the way that I feel.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you probably wouldn't have had the severity of your illness if you'd have gone in sooner and had yourself checked out
Yeah,
when the pain started.
that's probably right.
I'm after Dad about that with his hips. I'm going, man, why don't you go ahead and have them fixed now while you're at least young enough to recover? Because if you wait till you're 85, you may not be able to recover.
Yeah.
When you have to have a hip replacement, then you'll be stuck in
You
a
start
chair.
doing surgery on somebody that's I had my appendix removed in 1941 in Martinsville, and they brought George up there. He was just a baby, and put him in the bed with me in the hospital. And they brought me home on December the 7th, 1941, the day they bombed Pearl Harbor.
Wow.
That was the day that I come home from the hospital.
Wow. That was a long time in the hospital.
You were in the hospital for 6 days.
7 days in the hospital for appendix. Now, 1 day,
Mm-hmm.
but I had to stay in the hospital 7 days.
Mm-mm.
They had me in the hospital for my appendix. It was about to rupture. And I called my friend. She was in Miami, and my friend came down and picked me up because he was a retired doctor. He was a dermatologist. He said, you're probably having an appendix attack. So he took me, and they operated on me. The very next day, Hurricane Wilma came through. So they told me, you have to leave the hospital. We're shutting the hospital down. So they made me get up and leave the hospital the day after I had my appendix out. And they said, we'll either airlift you to Sebring, Florida, or you can go home, but you can't stay here. We're shutting the hospital down.
Yeah.
It's like, well,
My appendix was on the verge of rupturing. In fact, it had swelled up there. Right where they moved, there was a little pond. Is NASA, but NACA before NASA. God, I can't recall now what the C was
C
for.
stand.
wow, that's interesting.
What would the C stand for?
National.
But most of what they had going on at Langley Field before the space program was they done a lot of research and so forth on aircraft and wind tunnel tests for aircraft and so forth, and that's and when
Well, the jet age was only 10 years old. I mean,
yeah.
you know, when were jets invented? Late World War One, early World War Two.
I don't know when the jets was invented, but as far as the jet aviation of flying that we fly now, it didn't start until 1960. No, by about 1959, I think is. I know before that. In fact, when I went into the Army, they didn't even have jets to fly us overseas. We had to go by boat. So I spent. I was in the Army, and I spent 40-some days on troop ships
Good gosh.
because they couldn't fly. So but they didn't have. Now they jet everybody, but I went from San Francisco to Japan on a troop ship. I went from Japan to Korea on a troop ship. I come back from Japan to the United States on a troop ship. I remember when we first started flying jets was I believe it was 1959 was the first jet I flew on. That was a 707. I believe was it.
Well, part of your original 7 astronauts, they were jet test pilots.
Yeah,
weren't
yeah. They were all jet test pilots.
Yeah.